We're not invisible anymore.
I will finally have the child my ex-wife never could, Langston Thorne declared boldly, his voice echoing through the grand old church. He turned deliberately toward the back pew, locking eyes with the one person he thought he'd erased from his story, Amira Bennett. Gasps filled the sanctuary. Some guests looked confused, others looked uncomfortable, and still a few chuckled nervously, unsure if they had just heard the billionaire CEO admit, in front of hundreds of guests and God, that his previous marriage ended not in love lost, but in her supposed failure to give him a child. Amira didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stood. With the kind of grace that only a woman who has suffered silently for too long could carry, Amira Bennett walked to the back of the church, rested her hands on the heavy oak doors, and pushed them wide open. A stream of golden light spilled into the room. And then it happened. Objection! 4 young voices rang out in perfect unison, sharp, strong, and unapologetic. Every head turned. Standing just outside the church steps were 4 boys dressed in crisp black tuxedos. All of them were beautiful, brown-skinned, their features unmistakably echoing the man at the altar. Langston's jaw dropped. The guests began whispering. One woman in the second row covered her mouth. A man in the back murmured, "Wait, are those his kids?" Behind them stood Amira, proud and radiant, not a hair out of place. A tailored black dress, minimal makeup, but her beauty undeniable. And in that moment, her calm presence screamed louder than any revenge speech could. The bride, Brielle Monroe, whipped her head toward Langston. "Who are they, Langston?" she demanded. Langston took a step back. Brielle looked at the boys again, scanning their faces. Her voice cracked. "Why does that one have your eyes?" The smallest boy, Levi, clutched the hem of his brother's blazer. The oldest, Elijah, stepped forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small plastic hospital bracelet. He placed it gently on the edge of the altar. "Langston Elijah Thorne, Jr.," it read. And then the next boy stepped up. Then the third, and finally the youngest. 4 bracelets, 4 names, all with the same last name, Thorne. Silence. No organ music, no vows, just truth echoing off marble floors. This is not just a wedding gone wrong. This is a black story of a woman erased, children denied, and a name reclaimed. You're watching Hidden Worth. And what happens next? You'll need to see it to believe it. But before we go deeper into how Amira Bennett, a black waitress and single mom of 4, turned a moment of humiliation into a triumph of truth, take a second to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Then hit subscribe, because here we tell stories no one else dares to. Now, let's go back to how it all began. 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks before the wedding, before the objection, before the whispers, before the truth shook the pillars of the church, Amira Bennett was just trying to get through another Tuesday. It was 5:32 in the morning. The microwave clock blinked in the dim light of her kitchen. A worn-out toaster groaned as it browned the last 2 slices of bread. The smell of instant coffee mixed with the scent of baby lotion and dryer sheets. Her tiny 2-bedroom apartment, tucked away on the east side of Savannah, Georgia, was quiet. For now. Amira moved like muscle memory. She poured cereal into 4 mismatched bowls, sliced a bruised banana into careful sections, and packed peanut butter sandwiches into paper bags labeled in Sharpie. Elijah, Zion, Micah, Levi, her 4 boys, each of them a miracle, each of them a daily reminder of the man who left her when he found out she was carrying not one baby, but 4. Langston Thorne had been her husband once, a rising real estate mogul back then, still in his early 30s, ambitious, charming, dangerous in a suit, and even more so in silence. When the doctor said quadruplets, Langston said nothing at first. Then he disappeared. One suitcase, one voicemail, one wire transfer of $5,000. That was all he left behind. No goodbye, no plan, no nursery, and certainly no intention of being a father to 4 black sons born to a waitress he no longer needed on his arm. That was 5 years ago. Now Amira was 31, with dark circles under her eyes and calluses on her hands. Her shifts at the Dandelion Cafe lasted 12 hours on most days. Tips were inconsistent. Customers were impatient, and some days her coworkers made comments she had learned to ignore. Must be hard having 4 kids and no ring. Another sister with a baby daddy problem. You sure all 4 got the same father? Sometimes she wanted to scream, but mostly she just smiled. The kind of smile that says, I've heard worse and I'm still standing. Her apartment wasn't much. Peeling paint on the corners of the wall, a leaky faucet in the bathroom, and neighbors who played music too loud on weeknights. But it was clean, it was safe, and it was full of love. Every night, Amira sat at the kitchen table helping with homework while the laundry buzzed in the corner. She memorized spelling lists, patched jeans with missing knees, and made sure Elijah's asthma inhaler was always within reach. On weekends, she braided Micah's hair, sewed missing buttons onto Zion's shirts, and painted cardboard castles with Levi. She did everything. And yet, there were days, quiet, cruel days, when her mind whispered the lie that maybe she wasn't enough, that maybe Langston was right. Maybe no one wanted a woman who had 4 children and no husband. Maybe no one saw her beyond her skin, her uniform, her broken past. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the isolation. Birthday parties where the other moms avoided her. School functions where she sat alone on the bleachers. Even the church she once loved began to feel like a place where pity followed her into every pew. But she never complained, not once, because every morning her sons woke up smiling. Every evening they wrapped their arms around her waist and said, "Love you, Mama." And that was enough, or at least it had to be, until the day the wedding invitation arrived. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Keller, her old neighbors before she had to downsize. The envelope had been forwarded by mistake. Inside was an ivory card embossed with gold lettering. Elegant, expensive, exactly what she expected from Langston Thorne. You are cordially invited to the union of Langston Thorne and Brielle Monroe, it read. Underneath, in italics, a celebration of new beginnings and the family we've been praying for. The words hit harder than she expected. A family we've been praying for. Amira stared at the card for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly. She thought about Elijah's deep-set eyes, so much like his father's. About Zion's stubborn little frown, a mirror of Langston's own. About Micah's endless questions, Levi's musical laugh. She thought about the nights she had rocked 4 babies to sleep alone, crying silently because there was no one else to do it, no one else who stayed. And now Langston was preparing to stand at the altar, dressed in designer linen, while another woman wore white and smiled at a future Amira had once been promised. She didn't cry. She didn't tear the card. She placed it on the kitchen table. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something she had buried deep. Not revenge, not rage, just this. It's time he knew. It's time they all knew. She wasn't invisible, and neither were her sons. Not anymore. There was a time when Amira believed Langston Thorne was the answer to every prayer she'd ever whispered into her pillow at night. They met on a rainy Thursday in downtown Savannah, at a bookstore cafe that smelled like cinnamon and rainwater. She was 25, wearing a borrowed coat and pushing the stroller of a baby she was babysitting on her day off. He was 30, dressed in a charcoal blazer, scrolling through his phone while sipping espresso. Their eyes met over a stack of used paperbacks. Langston made the first move. "You like poetry?" he asked, nodding toward the Maya Angelou collection in her hands. "Only the kind that doesn't pretend everything's fine when it isn't," she replied. He chuckled. "Then you'll love her." That was it. One conversation turned into coffee. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into weeks of him picking her up after her shifts, waiting outside in his luxury SUV, a quiet playlist humming through the speakers while she climbed in, exhausted but smiling. Langston was charming, ambitious. He spoke like a man who already owned everything he was reaching for, and in many ways, he did. He came from old money, black Southern wealth with roots in commercial real estate and land development. His grandfather was one of the first black men in Georgia to own a construction firm after the civil rights era. Amira was nothing like the women Langston usually dated. She was a waitress at a soul food joint, a part-time nursing student. She wore her hair in natural curls, spoke softly, and laughed with her whole chest. She didn't chase luxury, and she didn't beg for attention. Maybe that's why he fell for her. Or maybe he just liked the way she looked at him like he was already whole, long before the business deals and magazine covers. Within 6 months, they were living together. By the end of the year, they were married in a quiet civil ceremony with only a few friends present. Amira never needed the big wedding. What she wanted was a partner, a home, a future built on more than ambition and status. For a while, that's what they had. He cooked her breakfast on Sundays. When no one was around, they danced in the kitchen. They talked about their dreams of starting a family and raising kids who would know their worth not by what they owned, but by how much they loved. Then she got pregnant. Amira remembered the day very well. She had taken the test in the small bathroom of their loft apartment. She ran into the living room and waved it in the air like a golden ticket when it turned positive. Langston picked her up off the ground and spun her around. "I'm gonna be a dad," he whispered, almost like he didn't believe it. They celebrated with takeout and sparkling juice. He kissed her stomach and said, "Boy or girl, I'll love this baby with everything I've got." 2 weeks later, they went in for the ultrasound. The technician's eyes went wide. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, and wow, 4. Amira laughed, thinking it was a joke. Langston did not. He went quiet, didn't speak the entire drive home. Later that night, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. 4 kids, Amira? That's not just a family, that's a football team. She smiled nervously. "We'll make it work, we always do." But he didn't smile back. "We're not ready. We don't have the space, the money, the time." She reached for his hand. "Langston, we're building something real. We can figure it out. You're not doing this alone." He pulled his hand away. "You don't get it," he snapped. "This isn't just about diapers and strollers. This is my reputation, my image. I have investors, a brand. What do you think they'll say when they find out I'm having 4 kids with a waitress from East Savannah?" Amira stared at him. The man she loved, the man who once said she made him feel more like a man than money ever could. "Is that what I am to you now? A threat?" His answer came in silence. The next morning, he left before sunrise. By the end of the week, he had moved out. A letter arrived 2 days later, typed, not handwritten. It said he wished her the best, that he would take care of her in his own way, that this wasn't personal, it was survival. Inside the envelope, a check for $5,000. and a legal notice of divorce. That was the last time Amira saw him in person. No calls, no texts, no inquiries when the babies were born, no birthday cards, no child support. He vanished. And for a long time, she convinced herself it was better that way. Until that wedding invitation showed up, and everything she buried started to rise. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday. Amira had just come back from her second shift at the diner. Her feet ached, and her shoulders were sore from carrying trays and dodging rude customers who treated her like part of the furniture. She dropped her keys into the chipped ceramic bowl by the door and kicked off her worn-out sneakers. The boys were finishing their homework at the kitchen table, their notebooks spread across the surface like puzzle pieces. Elijah, the oldest, was quietly helping Levi sound out new words. Zion and Micah were fighting over a crayon, but it was the soft kind of fighting, the kind that ends in laughter and hugs. Amira picked up the stack of mail sitting on the kitchen counter. Most of it was junk, grocery flyers, credit card offers she never asked for, and a past-due electric bill she was trying to ignore. Then she saw it. A thick ivory envelope with gold trim, heavy paper, expensive ink, the kind of envelope you don't just toss aside. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Keller, Unit 2B, Sweetwater Apartments, Savannah, GA 31401. That was her old address. She had lived in Unit 2B back when she and Langston first moved in together, before the pregnancy, before everything fell apart. She flipped the envelope over. The return label read, "The Thorne Monroe Wedding, Savannah Historic Chapel." Her fingers tightened. She carefully opened the envelope, trying not to rip it, though part of her wanted to tear it to shreds before even looking at the contents. Inside was a folded invitation, thick as cardstock, embossed with elegant cursive. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Langston Elijah Thorne and Brielle Isabel Monroe." She stared at the names. Langston, Elijah, the middle name she had given to their firstborn son. Below the names, the words gleamed in gold. "A celebration of new beginnings and the family we've been praying for. A family we've been praying for." She read that line again and again, her vision blurring slightly. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Mama, who's that from?" Elijah asked from the table, craning his neck to see. She blinked quickly, hiding the invitation behind her back. "Just junk mail, baby," she said with a smile too tight for comfort. But it wasn't junk mail. It was salt on a wound that never fully healed. Amira stepped into the small hallway, shutting the bathroom door behind her. She sat on the closed toilet lid and stared down at the card again. Brielle Monroe. She remembered the name all too well. Brielle had been at Langston's company Christmas party years ago. Back then, she was just a branding consultant with platinum blonde hair, red stilettos, and a tongue sharp enough to slice glass. That night, Brielle had looked Amira up and down and said, "Oh, you're the wife? I assumed you were just staff." Langston had laughed it off, said Brielle didn't mean anything by it. But Amira never forgot the way Brielle's smile curled when she said it, like Amira was nothing more than a placeholder until something better came along. Now she was wearing white. Now she was getting the family Langston had once promised Amira. Except it wasn't her family. Not really. Because the family he claimed to be praying for already existed. It was sitting just outside that door, coloring with broken crayons and dreaming of being seen. She looked down at her hands, strong hands, tired hands, hands that had held 4 babies through fevers, scraped knees, nightmares, and lonely Christmas mornings. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She folded the invitation, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it gently on the bathroom counter. When she opened the door, all 4 boys looked up at her. Their eyes so full of questions, so full of him. She walked over and kissed the tops of their heads one by one. Then she turned to Elijah. "Baby," she said softly, "how would you feel about wearing a tux?" The next morning, Amira stood outside the courthouse with the wedding invitation clutched in her purse. She wasn't sure why she was there. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe, after 5 years of swallowing her story, she was finally ready to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't flinch. She hadn't planned to go in. She hadn't called ahead. She didn't even know if her friend still worked there. But something pulled her up those concrete steps. Inside, the air was cold and quiet, the hum of bureaucracy filling the halls. Amira followed the signs to the legal aid office, nerves dancing in her stomach like fireflies. When she pushed open the glass door, the receptionist barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Amira said quietly, "but I'm looking for Kendra Doyle." The woman looked over her glasses. "She's in court this morning. You can wait or leave a message." Amira hesitated, then sat on the plastic chair near the window, her knees bouncing slightly. It had been nearly 6 years since she'd seen Kendra. Back in college, they were inseparable. Roommates, co-workers at the campus bookstore, sisters in everything but blood. But life had taken them in different directions. Amira into motherhood, Kendra into law school. She wasn't even sure Kendra would remember her. But 20 minutes later, the door burst open, and in walked a woman in a navy blue suit, heels clicking, laptop bag over her shoulder, and curls pulled into a high puff. Kendra Doyle hadn't changed a bit. Her eyes scanned the room and stopped. "Amira?" Amira stood slowly, uncertain. Kendra's face lit up like a sunrise. "Girl, is that you?" Amira couldn't help it. She smiled. They hugged tightly, the kind of hug that says, "I didn't realize how much I missed you until right now." "What are you doing here?" Kendra asked, pulling back. You look strong." "I'm tired," Amira admitted with a laugh. "But strong sounds better." Kendra motioned her into her office and shut the door behind them. The room was small, filled with case folders and a whiteboard covered in sticky notes and deadlines. "So," Kendra said, settling into her chair, "tell me everything, and I mean everything." Amira didn't hold back. She told her about Langston, the pregnancy, the silence, the years of raising 4 boys on her own, and then the wedding invitation. Kendra listened without interrupting. Her face didn't flinch, but her pen tapped harder and harder against the desk with each new detail. When Amira was done, Kendra leaned forward. "You mean to tell me that Langston Thorne, Langston Forbes 40 under 40 Thorne, walked away from 4 of his own children, never paid a dime, never acknowledged them, and now he's about to parade down the aisle like some kind of savior?" Amira nodded slowly. "I've never asked for anything. I want the truth to matter." Kendra's eyes burned with fire. "It will." She opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick packet. "I've spent the last 6 years fighting for women like you, for kids like yours. Langston might have money, but he doesn't have immunity, not when he abandoned his legal responsibilities." Amira blanked. "So, what can I do?" "You file a paternity suit. You pursue child support, and you hold him accountable publicly. Quiet strength is admirable, but it won't feed those boys, and it sure as hell won't teach them how to demand respect." "I don't want this to be revenge," Amira said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just want my sons to know they're not some mistake." Kendra nodded. "Then we do this right, with evidence, with facts, with dignity. She stood up and grabbed her coat. "Come on," she said. "We're going to get those hospital records, and then we're going to make sure Langston Thorne hears every single name of the children he tried to forget." Amira followed her out of the office, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with purpose. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't walking alone. The plan was simple. Show up, tell the truth, let the world see what Langston Thorne had tried to erase. But preparing for that moment wasn't simple at all. Amira knew that showing up to the wedding would require more than just courage. It would require poise, clarity, and, for her boys, discipline. They couldn't just walk into that church and shout. They had to speak with the kind of presence that turned heads and opened eyes. They had to become undeniable. So the rehearsals began. Every evening after dinner, after homework and baths, Amira pushed the coffee table aside and lined her sons up in the living room like they were backstage at a school play. "Straight backs, chin up, shoulders square," she instructed, her voice gentle but firm. Elijah, the oldest, caught on quickly. At 5 years old, he was already showing signs of becoming a natural leader. He stood tall, eyes fixed straight ahead, soaking in every word. Zion followed close behind. He was quieter, more reserved, but when Amira explained why this mattered, that this wasn't just about them, but about being seen and heard, he straightened up too. Micah, the curious one, kept asking questions. "Will Daddy be mad? Will the people clap? What if they don't believe us?" Amira knelt in front of him, her hands resting gently on his small shoulders. "They don't have to believe us," she said softly. "The truth doesn't need permission." Levi, the baby of the bunch, was the most sensitive. He clung to his brothers, especially Elijah, and had a habit of hiding behind his big brother's legs when things got loud. So Amira found a different role for him. "You're the heart of this, baby," she told him one night. "You don't have to speak unless you want to, but your presence, just being there, will say more than words ever could." He nodded, his round cheeks flushed with seriousness. "Okay, Mama." One Saturday morning, they went thrift shopping for suits. They found 4 matching tuxedos, slightly used but clean and classy. Amira hemmed the pants herself in the evenings, measuring carefully while the boys stood on chairs and giggled at how fancy they looked. "You look like little kings," she told them. "And you look like a queen," Elijah replied, beaming. Amira's heart clenched. They didn't even know what they were stepping into. The cameras, the crowd, the judgment. But they trusted her, completely. One night, as they sat on the couch practicing their entrance, Amira turned off the lights and lit a single candle in the middle of the room. "We walk into that church not to embarrass anyone," she said, but to remind someone of what he chose to forget. The candle flickered in the dark. This is not about hate. It's about healing. For us. For the truth. They practiced walking in a straight line, each boy carrying his hospital bracelet in his tiny hand. Amira had saved all 4 from the day they were born, tucked inside a shoebox in her closet for 5 years. Now, they were the proof. Each bracelet had the baby's name, date of birth, and the father's last name, Thorne. She didn't even know if Langston remembered she had chosen his last name for them. Maybe he thought she'd moved on, or that she was too proud to hold on. But the truth was, she kept that name because one day the boys would have questions, and she wanted to have answers. Amira made copies of their birth certificates, medical records, and DNA tests that Kendra helped her expedite. They stacked it all in a simple folder, nothing flashy, just facts. On the final night before the wedding, she stood in the living room in front of her sons and asked them each one question. "Why are you going?" Elijah answered first, "Because he needs to see me." Zion said, "Because I want to show him I'm not afraid." Micah whispered, "Because I want him to know I'm smart." And Levi, the smallest, looked up with wide eyes and said, "Because you said we are worth it." Amira knelt in front of them, tears gathering in her eyes. "You are," she said, her voice thick, "more than you'll ever know." And in that moment, she realized something powerful. No matter how the wedding went, no matter what Langston said or denied or did, they had already won, because her boys knew their worth. The farmer's market was bustling that Saturday morning, filled with the scent of fresh peaches, warm kettle corn, and summer flowers. Tents lined the sidewalk along River Street, and families weaved in and out of the stalls with tote bags and iced lemonades in hand. Amira didn't go often. Between her shifts and the boys' schoolwork, her weekends were usually packed. But they had finished rehearsing early that day, and the boys had begged for homemade popsicles from Miss Loretta's stand. She gave in. The boys darted ahead, racing to pick out flavors. Blueberry for Zion, watermelon for Levi, something spicy for Micah because he liked a challenge. Elijah lingered beside her, his hand resting gently on her arm, more protective than most 5-year-olds should ever have to be. Amira scanned the crowd as they waited in line. The usual faces from her side of town, a few tourists, a handful of older couples. And then she saw her. A woman in her late 60s, elegant in a cream pantsuit and sun hat, holding a bouquet of lavender and tulips. Her gray curls framed her high cheekbones, and the way she walked, upright, composed, made her impossible to forget. Vivian Thorne, Langston's mother, Amira's former mother-in-law. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't seen Vivian since the week after Langston left, 5 years ago. That final conversation still rang in her ears. "I raised my son to build an empire," Vivian had said coldly, her voice crisp and brittle like a dried leaf. Back then, Amira had still been pregnant. She had stood in the foyer of Vivian's grand estate, her belly just starting to show beneath her coat, begging the woman to at least listen. But she never got past the front steps. Vivian had closed the door without another word. And now, here they were again, on equal ground, in public, with no mansion walls or gated communities between them. Vivian hadn't seen her yet. Amira considered walking away. But before she could move, Levi ran up with his popsicle, his cheeks flushed from the heat. "Mama, I got strawberry," he chirped. And then he saw her. Levi tilted his head, staring up at the older woman with wide, curious eyes. "You look like my big brother Elijah," he said matter-of-factly. Vivian turned. Her eyes landed on Levi and froze. For a second, time stretched. She looked at the boy, then at Amira, then back at the boy. And she knew. The resemblance was undeniable. Levi's nose, his chin, the small dimple that only showed when he smiled. Every inch of him was Langston. Vivian's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Levi blinked up at her. "Are you my grandma?" Amira's breath caught. Vivian's face tightened. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp, as if trying to regain control of a ship already sinking. She clutched her bouquet tighter and stepped back. But Levi reached out, gently touching the edge of her sleeve. "You smell like flowers," he said innocently. "You're pretty." Vivian's expression cracked. For just a second, a flicker of something old and human flashed across her face. Guilt? Recognition? Fear? It was hard to tell. Amira stepped forward and took Levi's hand gently. "Come on, sweetheart, let's give the nice lady her space." Vivian's eyes flicked to Amira, and this time she spoke. "I didn't know." Amira looked her dead in the eye. "You didn't want to." The silence between them was heavy, thick with all the things left unsaid over 5 long years. Vivian glanced at the other boys, now gathered near their mom, eating popsicles and laughing. They were clearly hers, clearly Langston's, clearly family. "I should go," Vivian said, her voice thinner now. She turned and walked away, quickly disappearing into the crowd. Amira didn't follow. She stood still, Levi's sticky hand wrapped around hers. "Mama, who was that lady?" he asked. Amira looked down at him, her voice calm. "Just someone from the past, baby." He nodded, content with that answer. And as they walked back toward their car, Amira didn't feel angry. She felt clear. The world was starting to see what she had always known. The truth had a face, and soon it would have a voice. The week of the wedding came faster than any of them expected. It was strange how the days seemed to speed up the closer they got to the moment everything would change. The sky felt heavier. The mornings were quieter. Even the air seemed to hum with the kind of tension that made your chest tight and your thoughts louder than usual. Amira tried to keep everything normal. Morning cereal, clean laundry, bedtime stories, gentle songs whispered over sleepy heads. But her boys could feel it. They were young, yes, but children know more than they're given credit for. And these boys, her boys, had always been sensitive to her moods, especially Elijah. One night, 3 days before the wedding, she found him sitting by the window after bedtime. His pajamas were wrinkled, his feet bare against the hardwood floor. He was staring out into the street where the lamplight spilled golden across the pavement. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. He didn't look away. "What if he doesn't want us?" The question hit like a fist to the stomach. Amira sat beside him, wrapping her arms around his narrow shoulders. He leaned into her, but his body was tense. "He already didn't want us, didn't he?" Elijah asked. "That's why he left." Amira closed her eyes for a moment. She had prepared answers. Words about love, about worth, about how none of this was the boy's fault. But now, sitting in the quiet with her oldest son pressed against her side, she couldn't bring herself to recite anything scripted. Instead, she whispered the truth. "I don't know what your daddy will say. I don't know what he'll do. But what I do know is this. You are not here by accident, and no man walking this earth gets to decide if you matter." Elijah blinked slowly. "But what if people laugh? What if he tells us to go away?" Amira kissed his forehead. "Then we stand tall. We speak anyway. We walk out proud, and we remember who raised us." Down the hall, she heard soft murmurs. Zion was talking in his sleep. Micah was humming under his breath. Levi had crawled into her bed again, something he hadn't done in a while. The fear was spreading. At breakfast the next morning, Zion refused to eat. Micah, who was usually bouncing off the walls with energy, sat quietly with his hands in his lap, and Levi wouldn't let go of Amira's hand. She knelt down, eye level with them, her eyes warm but serious. "Boys," she said, "this isn't about being loud or making trouble. This is about truth. You have a right to be known, and you don't need permission to exist." They nodded, but the fear didn't leave. So she tried something different. That night, she took out her old photo albums, not the ones from her childhood, but the small red binder she had kept hidden at the back of her closet, the one labeled Beginnings. Inside were pictures of her baby bump, sonograms, Polaroids from the hospital, each boy's first day home. They sat on the couch, the four of them squeezed against her like puzzle pieces, looking through their beginnings. "This was me and Elijah," she said, pointing to a blurry photo of her lying in a hospital bed, cradling a tiny newborn. "I had just finished 19 hours of labor, and I was scared out of my mind." "Who took the picture?" Micah asked. "A nurse. She said I looked like a superhero." Zion raised an eyebrow. "You kinda do." They laughed, and for the first time that week, the tension broke a little. She showed them the birth certificates, the hospital bracelets, the letters she had written to each of them on the night they were born. "See this?" she said, tapping Levi's name. "You were always enough, even when someone else wasn't brave enough to stay. The next morning, the boys seemed lighter. They helped one another practice their lines again. Micah wrote his name in bold marker on the folder of documents. Zion drew a small heart on the inside flap. Even Levi, once so quiet, started asking questions about how long they'd have to walk before they reached the altar. Amira smiled. The wedding was only 2 days away, and no matter what happened in that church, they would walk in together. Not afraid, not ashamed, but whole. The sky was impossibly blue that morning, the kind of clear, bright southern sky that makes everything look more vivid, more real. Savannah's historic chapel stood like a monument to old money and old stories, its tall white columns wrapped in ivory roses and golden silk ribbon. Guests arrived in sleek cars and designer suits, escorted down the red carpet toward double oak doors that gleamed in the sunlight. Inside, the air was sweet with lilac and expectation. Langston Thorne stood at the altar, polished to perfection. He wore a custom tuxedo tailored in Milan, his smile as calculated as the lighting in the room. His eyes flicked toward the grand wooden doors every few seconds, watching for her. Brielle Monroe, his soon-to-be wife. She was late, but not too late. Brides always made them wait, right? He adjusted his cufflinks, whispered something to his best man, ignored the twitch in his jaw. Brielle arrived 15 minutes later, stepping through the doors like she was walking a Paris runway. Her dress was all sparkle and sharp lines, beautiful but cold. Her smile was tight, her walk rehearsed. The guests rose. The organ began to play. Amira watched it all from outside, standing just behind a row of flowering hedges with her sons at her side. "You ready?" she whispered. Elijah nodded first, then Zion, then Micah. Levi took her hand. "I'm scared." She squeezed gently. "Me too. But we go together." Kendra, standing nearby, in a navy suit and heels, checked the time. She held a slim envelope, the legal documentation prepared days ago. "Go on cue," Kendra said calmly. "Right after the vows start. Make them see." Amira gave a small nod. Inside, the priest began the ceremony. His voice carried, crisp and clean through the open church doors. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Langston barely listened. He was busy imagining the press coverage, the headlines, the perfect photos, the new chapter. Brielle was his new beginning. The priest continued, "If anyone here has reason this union should not go forward." That's when it happened. A small, clear voice cut through the still air. "Objection!" Gasps rippled through the pews. Heads turned. Whispers buzzed. And then 3 more voices joined the first. "Objection! Objection! Objection!" 4 boys stood just inside the chapel doors, each dressed in black tuxedos. Their shoes were shined, their posture straight. Elijah stepped forward, a hospital bracelet in hand. Zion followed, then Micah, then Levi. The room went silent. Langston's face went blank. Brielle turned, confusion darkening her perfectly contoured features. "What the hell is this?" Amira stepped into the chapel behind her sons. She wasn't wearing anything dramatic, just a fitted black dress, her hair in a soft twist, minimal makeup. But the way she walked, calm, upright, unapologetic, made people sit up straighter. Langston's voice cracked first. "Amira?" She didn't answer. Each boy walked to the front, one by one, placing a small plastic hospital bracelet on the edge of the altar. Elijah's read, Langston Elijah Thorne Jr. Zion's, Zion Matthew Thorne. Micah's, Micah James Thorne. Levi's, Levi Gabriel Thorne. Brielle's face turned white. Langston stumbled back a step, like someone had punched the air from his lungs. "You need to leave," he muttered. But Amira just looked at him. "I asked you once, 5 years ago, to look me in the eye and tell me those boys weren't yours. You didn't. You ran." Langston raised his hand. "This is not the time or place." "This is exactly the time," Kendra said from the side, stepping forward with the envelope. "Langston Thorne, you've just been served." She handed him the official notice: child support suit, back payments, paternity acknowledgement. Brielle stepped down from the altar, snatching the papers from his hand. "Is this a joke? Are they really yours?" Langston opened his mouth, but nothing came out. So Elijah answered for him. "We are." His voice was steady. "You used to be our daddy, but you forgot." Brielle let out a choked laugh. "You told me she couldn't have kids." Langston tried to grab her arm. "Brielle?" She pulled away, mascara streaking. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone." Amira walked to her sons, placing a gentle hand on Levi's shoulder. She looked out at the crowd, some wide-eyed, others turning away. "I didn't come here to ruin a wedding," she said. "I came to remind this man, this father, of what he left behind." Langston finally found his voice. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Yes, you did," Amira replied, her tone still calm. "You just didn't want to deal with the truth, because truth isn't always convenient." Kendra nodded and stepped forward again. "The paperwork is done. The DNA tests are filed. You're legally their father, Langston. And now the court will hear everything you tried to bury." Langston looked at his sons. He hadn't seen them since they were infants, but the resemblance was terrifying. It was like facing his own reflection times 4. Brielle took off her ring and dropped it on the floor. "This whole thing," she whispered, "was a lie." She turned and walked out, her heels echoing like gunshots down the aisle. Langston didn't chase her. He looked at Amira, at the boys. He opened his mouth again, but nothing he could say would fix the years. So he said nothing. Amira turned to her sons. "You ready to go?" They nodded, proud. She took Elijah's hand, then Zion's, then Micah's. Levi wrapped his arms around her waist. And together they walked out the way they came, through truth, through silence, through power. The chapel behind them was quiet now. No vows, no kiss, just the echo of a family that refused to stay hidden. For a long moment, no one in the chapel moved. Langston stood frozen at the altar, the legal envelope trembling in his hand. His breath came slow, shallow, like the room itself was closing in on him. The guests sat speechless in the pews, eyes darting between the neatly dressed boys, the poised woman who once wore his ring, and the papers that threatened to collapse the empire he'd spent the last 5 years building. Kendra Doyle took a single step closer, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the sanctuary like a gavel. "You've officially been served," she said, voice steady, crisp, and unshakable. "Per Georgia state law, you are required to respond within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in automatic garnishment of wages, asset seizure, and back pay on all unpaid child support." A murmur rippled through the rows of guests. Phones were lifted. People whispered behind manicured hands. Langston swallowed hard. "This is a spectacle," he hissed. "You're making a spectacle out of me." Kendra raised a brow. "I didn't make this spectacle. You did, the moment you left a pregnant woman with 4 children and pretended she didn't exist." Amira stood behind her sons, her face calm, not triumphant, not angry, just resolved. She said nothing. Every piece of her energy was devoted to keeping the boys steady, safe, and shielded from the chaos erupting around them. Brielle, her wedding gown dragging behind her like a defeated flag, stared at Langston with fury in her eyes. "You lied," she said, her voice jagged and sharp, "about everything." Langston stepped toward her. "Brielle, listen." "No," she snapped, jerking away from his reach. "I won't be the trophy bride who finds out her husband has 4 secret children in the middle of our vows." She laughed bitterly, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Do you know how insane that sounds? Because everyone here will be talking about this for years. I will be a meme by dinner." The guests shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't wrong. Langston turned back toward Amira, desperation slipping through the cracks in his voice. "Why here? Why now? You could have talked to me privately." Amira looked him in the eye, her voice quiet but firm. "I tried privately, 5 years ago. You closed the door. You blocked my number. You moved states. You signed your silence like it was a contract." Langston's jaw clenched. This will ruin me." Amira's expression didn't change. Consequences aren't ruin. They're reminders. Kendra crossed her arms. "And speaking of reminders, the suit seeks $286,000 in back pay, medical expenses, early childhood care, and damages for abandonment, all fully documented." Langston's face paled. The number hit him harder than any words could. A man in the front pew, a venture capitalist Langston had worked with, leaned to the person beside him and whispered, "He's done. Investors will pull. This will tank everything." Langston heard it. He winced visibly. The truth was unraveling everything he'd spent years crafting. The clean image, the carefully curated stories in magazines, the narrative of a man who came from nothing and built an empire. The truth was shredding the illusion. And the truth stood only 3 feet tall and carried hospital bracelets. Elijah stepped forward again, his voice stronger now that his mother stood behind him. "We didn't come to ruin anything," he said softly. "We came because we're not invisible." The guests grew still again. Zion, usually shy, found his courage. "We wanted you to see us." Langston's eyes shimmered. Whether from shame, fear, or something else, no one could tell. Micah lifted his little chin. "And to stop lying." Levi squeezed Amira's hand and whispered, "Mama, can we go home now?" Amira touched his cheek gently. "Soon, baby." Then she looked at Langston one last time. "We didn't come here to destroy your wedding," she said. "We came to tell the truth. What you do with it now is your choice." Kendra added, "But the legal process, that's not optional." Langston tried to speak, but no words formed. Brielle stepped forward, ripping off her engagement ring and tossing it onto the floor. It bounced once, twice, then settled at the base of the altar. "For what it's worth," she said, glaring at Langston, "I hope she takes every last dollar you owe." Then she stormed down the aisle, her bridal bouquet slipping from her grip and scattering white rose petals like a trail of shattered dreams. The doors slammed shut behind her. Silence. Amira turned to her sons. "Come on," she whispered. They nodded, their small hands reaching for hers. Together, they walked down the aisle, past stunned guests, past the spilled petals, past the man who had once been their father, now standing alone in the place where he meant to start a new life. This was the moment the balance shifted. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in truth. And truth always rises. 3 weeks later, the courthouse felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather. It was a bright spring day outside. Sunlight spilled onto the marble steps, warming the metal handrails and baking the tops of parked cars. But inside courtroom B, everything was still and tense, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Amira sat on the left side, dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and black slacks. Her hair was pinned up neatly. Her hands were folded in her lap, though her knuckles were white from how tightly she held them together. Beside her, Kendra adjusted her glasses and whispered, "Deep breath. You're doing exactly what needs to be done." Across the aisle, Langston sat stiffly, flanked by a high-profile attorney in a $1,000 suit who had flown in from Atlanta. Langston was clean-shaven, dressed sharp as ever, but his eyes had lost something. There was no fire in them anymore, no spark of charm, just weariness. Behind him, 2 reporters sat with notepads quietly scribbling. The judge entered and called the room to order. "Case number 7261, Bennett versus Thorne," the clerk announced. "Petitioner seeks acknowledgement of paternity, retroactive child support, and public record of legal guardianship." Langston's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the respondent does not deny the biological relationship. However, we dispute the damages being requested and argue against publicizing certain aspects of the case due to professional and reputational concerns." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Your client is a public figure, Mr. Cole. This court deals in facts, not reputations." He turned to Amira's table. "Miss Doyle, proceed." Kendra stood calmly. "Your Honor, we are here today not just for money, but for dignity. Miss Bennett raised 4 children alone for 5 years, children Mr. Thorne knew existed and actively chose to ignore." She handed the judge a thick folder. Inside are DNA tests, medical records, birth certificates bearing his name, and evidence of evasion. No child support, no medical coverage, not even acknowledgement. Langston's lawyer objected. "There was no formal request for support. My client cannot be expected to respond to legal obligations never brought forward." Kendra didn't flinch. "We have a signed letter from Mr. Thorne to Mr. Bennett, dated shortly after the pregnancy confirmation. In it, he states, quote, 'I cannot raise 4 children with a woman in your position. I will not be involved.'" She paused. "That's abandonment, clear and simple." The judge skimmed the document, then looked at Langston. "Is this your signature?" Langston nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." Amira's chest tightened. The courtroom was silent except for the scribbling of pens and the low hum of a broken ceiling vent. Then the judge did something no one expected. "I'd like to hear from the children." Kendra's eyes widened slightly. "Your Honor, they're only 5. "I understand," the judge replied. "Just one, briefly, no pressure." Amira hesitated. But Elijah stood up on his own. He walked to the front of the courtroom with a quiet confidence that belonged to someone far older. The bailiff brought him a small booster so he could speak into the microphone. "What's your name, son?" the judge asked gently. "Elijah Thorne," he replied, "but most people just call me Eli." The judge smiled slightly. "Do you know why you're here today?" Eli nodded. "Because my mom always tells the truth, and now she wants other people to hear it." The room was still. The judge leaned forward. "Is there anything you want to say about your father?" Eli paused. Then he said, simply, "I don't need him to say sorry. I just want him to know we're real. I want him to stop pretending we don't exist." Langston turned away, jaw clenched. Kendra walked over and gently guided Elijah back to his seat. The judge took a deep breath. "I've seen a lot of cases in this courtroom, but this one stands out. Not because of the money or the fame, but because of the silence." He looked at Langston. Silence can be louder than anything spoken. And in this case, It speaks volumes. He looked at Amira. Miss Bennett, you've carried this weight with grace, and these children, they are a credit to your strength. He picked up his gavel. I hereby rule in favor of the petitioner. Legal paternity is granted and will be entered into public record. Back child support totaling $286,000 is awarded, with an additional $50,000 for emotional damages and legal costs. Langston closed his eyes. The gavel came down. The courtroom echoed with finality. Kendra leaned toward Amira and whispered, "You did it." Amira's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of the man who thought she'd never rise above what he left behind. Instead, she stood. And when Elijah reached for her hand, she took it in hers, proud and steady. Because today, the truth had spoken, and it had been heard. It was 2 days after the ruling when Amira got the message. She was folding laundry in the living room, matching tiny socks and smoothing out collared shirts for Sunday church, when her phone buzzed on the table. The boys were in the kitchen finishing their math worksheets, laughing over who had the messier handwriting. She almost didn't check it, but something made her pause. It was a text from Kendra. Langston reached out, says he wants to meet the boys, privately, not through lawyers. Amira stared at the screen, her thumb hovering above the reply button. After all these years, now he wanted to talk? She took a deep breath, walked to the window, and let the light hit her face. It wasn't anger she felt, not anymore. It was something quieter, a kind of guarded calm. That night, after the boys were asleep, she sat on the edge of her bed and thought about it. She remembered all the nights she stayed up rocking Levi through ear infections, and all the mornings Elijah stood by the door waiting for a father who never knocked. She remembered how she'd taught Zion to tie his shoes, Micah to read his first sentence, Levi to whistle. None of those memories included Langston. But the truth was, he was their father. And if they were ever going to find peace with that truth, maybe they deserved to face it on their terms. The next morning, Amira replied to Kendra's text, "Set it up, but my rules. One by one, in a public place, no cameras, no games." 2 days later, they met at a quiet cafe on the far side of town. Langston arrived first. He looked different. Not in the way clothes or haircuts change a man, but in the way life humbles someone. He wore a dark polo shirt and slacks, no tie, no flash. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of reflection. Amira sat across from him. They didn't speak at first. She simply said, "You'll see them one at a time, 10 minutes each. I'll be nearby." He nodded. "Thank you for letting me." She motioned toward the door. Elijah walked in, wearing a button-down and jeans. His backpack was slung over one shoulder like he was headed to class. He looked straight at Langston, but didn't smile. Langston cleared his throat. "Hi, Elijah." The boy sat down across from him, arms folded, posture tall. "You don't have to call me Dad," Langston said quickly. "I know I haven't earned that." Elijah tilted his head. "Then what are we doing here?" Langston hesitated. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for missing so much, for not being there." Elijah looked down for a second, then back up. "We're not here because you're sorry. We're here so you can say it. And then, maybe, one day, we'll believe it." Langston swallowed. Fair. After 10 minutes, Elijah stood and walked away without shaking his hand. Zion came next. He didn't say much, just nodded at the apology and asked one question. "Why didn't you want us?" Langston's eyes brimmed. "I was scared," he said. "But that doesn't make it okay." Zion shrugged. "It doesn't." Micah followed. He asked questions. "What's your favorite color? Do you like books? What kind of cereal do you eat?" Langston laughed nervously. "I like Raisin Bran." Micah made a face. "That's terrible." They both smiled, just a little. And then came Levi, the quiet one. He climbed into the seat across from Langston and pulled a toy truck from his pocket. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then, "Are you going to leave again?" Langston's throat closed. "No," he whispered. "Not if you don't want me to." Levi handed him the toy truck. "You can borrow it. Just bring it back." Langston nodded, holding back tears. "I will." And in that moment, there was no money, no courtrooms, no reporters. Just a man, a child, and the space between them beginning to heal. 3 months after the court ruling, Amira stood in front of a little building with chipped grain shutters and a faded for lease sign still dangling in the window. She held the keys in her hand. Cool, heavy, real. It had once been a diner, closed for almost a year now. But Amira saw more than peeling linoleum and dusty booths. She saw beginnings. Inside, the air was musty, the ceiling fans wobbled when turned on, and the walls needed fresh paint. But the bones were strong, and the vision in her heart was even stronger. The settlement money wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to rebuild. Enough to breathe. Enough to build something her boys could grow up watching her own. She named the cafe 4 Blessings. The name came easy. Each of her sons had inspired it. Elijah, Zion, Micah, Levi. 4 little miracles. 4 names she had whispered into the dark on nights she felt too tired to pray. Now, those names would be printed in gold letters across the front window of her very own business. Opening day was quiet. No grand announcement, no flyers or balloons. Just a hand-painted open sign and the smell of warm cornbread wafting into the street. Her first customer was an elderly woman from the neighborhood who asked for grits and sweet tea. Amira brought it herself, wearing an apron that said "Grace over Grind." By noon, the booths were full. Word traveled fast. Locals loved the home-style cooking. College students came for the free Wi-Fi and honey biscuits. Construction workers stopped in for early breakfasts before their shift. But more than the food, people came for the feeling, the peace, the welcome, the quiet strength of a woman who had been through fire and built something beautiful from the ashes. Her boys had their own corner in the cafe, the little thorn table. Each of them had a laminated menu item named after them. Elijah's big breakfast, 2 eggs, sausage, and cheese grits. Zion's zingy waffle, spicy syrup and cinnamon sugar. Micah's messy mac, loaded mac and cheese with 3 kinds of cheese. Levi's sweet tea float, a southern twist on a root beer float. Customers ordered by name, smiling as they said, "I'll have Elijah's," or "Give me 1 Zion and a Levi to go." The boys helped out after school, wiping tables, greeting guests, folding napkins. They wore little black aprons and name tags with stars drawn in Sharpie. They were proud of their mama, of their story, and of the name that once brought pain, but now carried purpose. Langston came by once. He didn't stay long. He brought the boys a book each, wrapped in brown paper, handwritten notes inside. He stood awkwardly at the counter and said, "You did good." Amira looked him in the eye. "I did better than good. I survived." He nodded slowly. "I hope someday they'll let me be a part of it." "That's between you and them," she said simply. And that was that. Some wounds heal slow. Some don't close all the way. But Amira didn't need an apology anymore. She had already moved forward. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the front windows, Amira sat on the porch bench outside the cafe, watching the boys chase fireflies. She felt something she hadn't in a long time: stillness. Not the stillness of waiting, not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the sound of laughter wrap around her like a blanket. And in that moment, Amira Bennett, once a waitress, once abandoned, once overlooked, was simply a woman at peace. No longer surviving, but thriving. Sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones no one notices. The woman wiping tables long after closing, the mother folding clothes in the middle of the night, the kid standing quietly in a courtroom asking to be seen. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about drama or headlines or bringing a man down. It was about one woman choosing truth over silence, dignity over shame. It was about 4 little boys who refused to let the world forget who they were just because their father did. And it was about what happens when you stop waiting for permission to stand in your power. Amira didn't become rich overnight. She didn't land on magazine covers or get offered a reality show deal. That's not the kind of ending this story needed. She became something better. Whole. In a world that tells Black women to shrink, to stay quiet, to carry pain and pretend it's grace, Amira chose something different. She stood up. Not with shouting, not with bitterness, but with facts, with poise, with 4 little hands in hers and love in her chest. And she won, not just in court, but in life. Because she showed her sons that truth is never something to be ashamed of. That no matter how broken your beginnings might look, they don't get to define your ending. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. You don't have to fight with fire to reclaim what's yours. You can do it with strength, with silence, with evidence, with patience. You can do it by showing up again and again, even when no one claps for you. You can do it by walking into a room where no one expects you to speak and saying everything without raising your voice. So if you're watching this today and you feel invisible, if you've been made to feel like your worth depends on someone else's approval or memory or last name, let this story be your reminder. You are not invisible. You are not forgettable. And you do not need to be chosen to be powerful. Sometimes just showing up for yourself is the loudest revolution of all. This was a Black story, a hidden story, but now it's been told. And here on Hidden Worth, we're committed to telling stories just like this. Stories that remind us what it means to survive with grace, to fight with dignity, and to rise with quiet strength. If this story moved you, made you pause, made you feel seen, take a moment right now to like, share, and subscribe. Not just for us, but for the next person who needs to hear they are not alone. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us which moment hit you hardest. And tell us what your hidden worth is, because someone out there needs to hear it too. We'll see you in the next story. But for now, walk tall, speak truth, and never, ever forget who you are.